I will never forget the day I found young Thabo's body at the bottom of Lion's Cliff. He was just 15 years old. His school uniform was torn and muddy, and his face, once so full of mischief and life, was still. The village children who used to follow him around like a pack of excited puppies stood far back, crying quietly. Some of them had been with him when he decided to prove he could jump across the narrowest part of the gorge. They had begged him not to try, but Thabo never listened to anyone anymore. Not since he stopped believing in the promises of adults. I am Gogo Sabanda, and I have lived in this village for 70 years. My eyes have seen 3 generations grow up among these dusty streets and rolling hills. Some people call me the village's memory. Perhaps that is why I must tell this story, so we do not forget what happens when we let our children raise themselves. I remember the day Thabo was born. The whole village celebrated because his parents were respected people in our community. His father, Mr. Ndlovu, had just been promoted at his company in the city. His mother was finishing her medical training at the big hospital. They named him Thabo, meaning joy. And truly, he brought joy to everyone who saw him in those early years. As a toddler, Thabo was the kind of child who made everyone smile. He would waddle down the street, chasing butterflies and greeting everyone with his big, bright eyes. His grandmother lived with them then, watching him while his parents worked. But when Thabo was 4, his grandmother became too sick to care for him anymore. She passed away a few months later, and that's when things began to change. His parents hired a series of maids to watch him, but none stayed long. Thabo was an energetic child who needed more attention than a maid could give. I would watch from my veranda as each new maid came and went like seasons changing. Some were kind, some were strict, but none could replace the love of parents who were there in body but absent in spirit. When Thabo was 6, I started noticing him sitting on his front step after school. At first, he would do his homework there, looking up hopefully every time a car passed by. Sometimes I would bring him sweet porridge or amakeke biscuits I had baked. He would tell me about his day, his words tumbling out like water from a spring. "Today we learned about frogs in science class," he would say, eyes shining. "Mama promised to take me to the pond this weekend to see real ones. She's a doctor, so she knows everything about living things." But when weekend came, his mother was called to an emergency at the hospital. The pond trip never happened. Baba said he would teach me to play football on Saturday, he would tell me another time, bouncing his new ball against the step. He was a football star when he was young. Did you know that, Gogo? But Saturday would come, and his father would be too exhausted from his week in the city, or an important client would need attention. I remember one day particularly well. It was Thabo's 8th birthday. His parents had promised a special celebration, a real party with a cake and all his friends. Thabo had talked about it for weeks. He even made little invitations in his wobbly handwriting. That morning, he put on his best clothes and sat waiting. Hours passed. The sun climbed high and then began to sink. One by one, his friends' mothers called them home. Still, Thabo sat there, clutching his invitations. It was dark when his mother's car finally pulled up. There had been an emergency surgery. His father called to say his flight from the city was delayed. I had stayed with Thabo all day, and when they finally came home, they brought him an expensive toy and a store-bought cake. But I saw something change in his eyes that day. It was like a little light went out. After that, Thabo stopped talking about his parents' promises. He became quieter at first, then restless. He started missing school, first just occasionally, then more often. By the time he was 10, he had gathered a group of other neglected children around him. They would roam the village like stray dogs, looking for trouble to fill their empty days. I remember the first time I caught them stealing mangoes from old Mrs. Moyo's tree. The other children ran away, but Thabo stood his ground, staring at me with defiant eyes. "Nobody cares what I do anyway," he said, his voice bitter. "My parents only care about their work and money." His parents tried to solve problems with money and gifts. When the school complained about his behavior, they bought him a new phone. When he was caught smoking with older boys behind the shop, they gave him new shoes. But what Thabo needed couldn't be bought in any store. The incidents got worse as he grew older. At 12, he broke into the school at night with his gang. They didn't steal anything. They just turned all the furniture upside down and wrote their names on the walls. When he was 13, he started the fire in the abandoned house at the edge of the village. Thankfully, the rain put it out before it could spread. His parents were called to school meetings, but they always sent excuses. "We are building a better future for him," his father would tell anyone who complained. "We're working so hard for his sake." But I wanted to ask them, what good is a better future if your child isn't there to live it? By 14, Thabo had become a legend among the village children. He knew all the dangerous places, the highest trees, the deepest pools, the steepest cliffs. He would perform daring stunts while younger children watched in awe. Each time he survived something dangerous, he would become bolder. I remember one afternoon, about a month before the end, when I found him teaching young children how to jump from the roof of the old grain store to a nearby tree. When I shouted at them to stop, the other children scattered, but Thabo just laughed. "Don't worry, Gogo," he said. "I know what I'm doing. I've been taking care of myself for years." The day before he died, I saw him sitting alone on his old step, looking at his phone. For the first time in years, I brought him some porridge like I used to. He seemed surprised by the gesture, and for a moment I saw that small boy again in his eyes. "My mother promised to take me to see the new Marvel movie this weekend," he said quietly. "She promised 3 weeks ago." His voice had that old hope in it, and it broke my heart. "Maybe this time she will come," I said, but we both knew better. That was our last real conversation. The next day, he took 5 younger children up to Lion's Cliff. They say he was laughing, showing off, telling them he wasn't afraid of anything. The gap he tried to jump was 6 meters wide. The children say he hesitated for a moment at the edge, looking back at his friends. Perhaps he was thinking of that promise about the movie. Perhaps he was hoping someone would stop him. But there was no one there who could. They found his phone later, cracked but still working. His last messages were to his parents. To his mother, "Are we still going to the movie tomorrow?" To his father, "Can you teach me to drive when you're home next weekend?" Neither message had been answered. The funeral was big. His parents spared no expense. Everyone from the village came, and many important people from the city. His mother wept uncontrollably, and his father looked like he had aged 10 years. They had brought pictures of Thabo as a baby, as a smiling toddler, as a young boy receiving awards at school. But there were no recent pictures. It was as if they didn't know who their son had become. After everyone left, I saw them standing in his room. His mother was holding one of his old school books, touching his handwriting from when he still cared about such things. His father was looking at football trophies from when Thabo was small and still believed in promises. They were seeing, finally, what they had missed. The empty spaces between the photographs, the years they had lost chasing success, while their son chased dangerous thrills to fill his lonely days. Some in the village say Thabo was just a bad boy who made poor choices. Others blame the modern world that forces parents to work far from home. But I know better. I saw him grow from a child waiting on the steps to a boy raising himself in the shadows of absent parents. In our village, we say it takes a whole community to raise a child. But a community cannot replace the love of a father and mother. Now, when I see parents rushing to their important jobs, leaving their children behind, I tell them Thabo's story. I tell them about the little boy who waited on the steps, about the teenager who jumped from cliffs, about the messages left unanswered on a broken phone. Some listen, some don't. But I will keep telling it, because in every village, in every city, there are children sitting on steps, waiting for promises that never come. And sometimes, like Thabo, they stop waiting and start looking for ways to feel alive in a world that has forgotten them. Sometimes they jump from cliffs, not because they want to die, but because they want someone to notice they were living. Every time I pass Thabo's house now, I see that empty step. Sometimes in the evening light, I think I can still see him there. A small boy waiting for his parents, a teenager with angry eyes, a broken body at the bottom of a cliff. All the same child, all asking the same question, am I not more important than your work? It's a question that still echoes in our village, carried on the wind that blows across Lion's Cliff. I hope someone hears it and remembers Thabo's story. Let me tell you more about the Thabo I knew, the boy behind the tragedy. There were moments, precious, fleeting moments, when I saw glimpses of the wonderful young man he could have become. Like the time during the Great Drought, when our village water pump broke. Thabo was 13 then. While his gang of friends suggested vandalizing the pump for fun, Thabo instead spent 3 days studying it. He borrowed old mechanical books from the school library, the first time he'd voluntarily touched a book in years. I watched him from my veranda, bent over those diagrams, his face screwed up in concentration. On the 4th day, he figured out the problem, a loose coupling that everyone else had missed. He fixed it himself, using tools he'd borrowed from the groundskeeper. For a few days after that, he was different, proud in a good way, standing taller. Teachers at school noticed too. Mr. Mutasa, the science teacher, even offered to mentor him in engineering. "Your son has a gift for mechanical things, Mr." Mutasa told Thabo's parents when they finally answered his calls. They promised to enroll Thabo in extra science classes in the city. But like all their promises, this one evaporated into the hot African air. 2 weeks later, Thabo was back with his gang, and the light of achievement in his eyes had dimmed once more. There was also the time he saved little Themba from drowning in the river. The younger children had been warned never to swim there during rainy season, but Themba didn't listen. When the current caught him, it was Thabo who dove in without hesitation. I saw him fighting against the angry water, holding Themba's head above the surface, somehow finding the strength to drag them both to shore. Themba's parents called Thabo a hero. For a week, he walked around the village with purpose, nodding solemnly when adults greeted him with respect. His parents promised to come to the special ceremony the village chief wanted to hold in his honor. But on the day of the ceremony, only Thabo's newest maid attended. His mother had an important conference. His father had meetings he couldn't reschedule. The next day, Thabo led his gang in throwing rocks through the chief's window. Even in his darkest days, Thabo showed flashes of kindness that broke my heart. He would share his lunch money with younger children whose families couldn't afford food. When old Mr. Dube's cat was stuck in a tree, Thabo climbed up to rescue it, even though Mr. Dube had chased him away from his mango trees many times. He taught younger children to read, even while refusing to attend his own classes. But these moments of light only made the darkness harder to bear. Each time Thabo did something good, each time he showed his true potential, his parents' absence cut deeper. It was as if he was saying, "Look what I can be, look what I'm worth." But there was never anyone there to look. The village tried to step in its own way. The shopkeeper would give him small jobs. The football coach kept inviting him back to the team. Even the school principal, after catching him smoking on school grounds for the 10th time, offered to arrange counseling instead of suspension. But Thabo had learned not to trust adults or their promises. "They're all the same," he told me once during one of our rare conversations. "They pretend to care until something more important comes up." He said this without bitterness, as if stating a simple fact about the world, like the sun rises in the east or rain falls from clouds. His parents sent him to 3 different therapists in the city. Each time, they dropped him at the office and rushed back to work, leaving him to find his own way home. The last therapist told them Thabo needed family counseling, all of them together. They scheduled 6 sessions, attended 1, canceled the rest due to work commitments. I remember the last time I saw Thabo smile, really smile like the little boy he used to be. It was 2 weeks before the cliff. A touring theater group had come to our village, performing traditional stories in the community hall. Thabo sat at the back with his gang, pretending to be uninterested. But when the lead actor called for volunteers to help act out the story of the clever hare, Thabo's hand shot up before he could stop himself. He was magnificent on that makeshift stage. He knew all the traditional movements, remembered all the call and response songs that his grandmother had taught him years ago. The audience laughed and clapped, and Thabo glowed with joy. For a moment, he was just a child again, playing in the spotlight. His parents had promised to attend that performance. Thabo had even saved them seats in the front row. They remained empty all evening, but he kept glancing at them between scenes, hope dying slowly in his eyes. The next day, he led his gang to the abandoned mine shaft on the edge of the village. They built a bonfire inside and danced around it, drinking stolen beer and howling like wild animals. When the police came, Thabo stood at the edge of the shaft, threatening to jump. It took the chief 3 hours to talk him down. This was the rhythm of Thabo's life. Moments of brightness followed by deeper darkness, each achievement poisoned by absence, each step forward followed by 2 steps back. Until finally, there were no steps left to take, except that last, fatal leap from Lion's Cliff. Sometimes I dream about all the Thabos that could have been. The Thabo who fixed the water pump, becoming an engineer. The Thabo who saved Themba, becoming a rescue worker. The Thabo who taught younger children, becoming a teacher. The Thabo who acted in the traditional plays, becoming a performer. So many possible Thabos, all lost now at the bottom of that cliff. But more than these grand futures, I dream about the simple moments that never were. A family dinner where phones remained untouched. A football game watched together. A school prize giving attended. A movie scene. A promise kept. After the funeral, Thabo's parents sold their big house and quit their prestigious jobs. His mother now works at our local clinic, and his father teaches at the primary school. They spend their free time counseling other parents about the importance of being present in their children's lives. Sometimes I see them sitting on that front step where Thabo used to wait, talking to children who pass by. But even as our village heals, we carry the weight of what we learned too late. Success built on the foundation of broken promises is no success at all. A child's love, once lost, leaves a wound that no amount of money or status can heal. And so I tell Thabo's story. All of it. The good and the bad, the light and the dark. I tell it to parents rushing to their cars in the morning. I tell it to ambitious young couples planning their futures. I tell it to teachers and doctors and business people who think their work is more important than a child's lonely hours. Because in every village, in every city, at this very moment, there is a child sitting on a step, waiting. And perhaps if we listen to Thabo's story, really listen, we might learn to see them before they stop waiting, before they start jumping, before they become another story that old women tell in the evening when the wind blows cold from Lion's Cliff. For Thabo's story is not just about a boy who died too young. It's about all of us, our choices, our priorities, our promises. It's about what we value and what we're willing to sacrifice for success. Most of all, it's about the price our children pay when we forget that love needs more than money to grow. In our village now, when the sun sets and children head home from play, parents often stand in their doorways, watching. Sometimes I hear them calling their children's names, not in anger or hurry, but in love and care, as if each call is a promise. I am here. I see you. You matter more than anything else. And in those moments, I think perhaps Thabo's story has changed something after all. Perhaps his last jump was not entirely in vain. Perhaps somewhere, right now, a parent is looking at their child's empty chair at the dinner table and remembering my story about the boy who raised himself. Perhaps they are picking up their phone, canceling a meeting, heading home. I hope so. I hope they understand what Thabo never had the chance to tell them. That sometimes the most important work we can do is simply being there, keeping the promises we make to those who love us most. And so his story ends, but its echo lives on in every parent's choice, every child's wait, every promise made or broken. Listen carefully, and you might hear it in the wind that blows across Lion's Cliff, in the laughter of children heading home, in the silence of empty steps waiting to be filled. Listen, and remember, Thabo. All parents must learn one or two from this. A broken promise to a child might take time to heal. Let me know what you have learned from this story in the comments. And make sure you tell me where you are watching from, so I can give you a shout out on my next video.